2016. Thank you everyone for attending Innosphere's Lunch and Learn today. We're really excited to be able to showcase one of our long-standing, very active partners of Wilson Sonsini, two gentlemen who are here today. And at any given time, please don't feel rude if you want to get up and grab more water, grab more food. We don't like leftovers here, so please help yourself. Before we get started, I just want to see a raise of hands as far as your engagement with the startup and innovation ecosystem, to get a sense for who we have in the room. Who here is from a life sciences company, or you're here because of like the life science, bioscience? Okay. And then if you didn't raise your hand, raise your hand. So maybe it's about half and half. Okay, I was kind of curious. When I quickly looked through, it looked like we were really heavy in life sciences, but it's great to see that we are about half and half here. Who here is a tenant of the Innosphere building? Do we have any tenants here? Oh, would you mind, as you're getting food, just your name and what company?
Sure, I'm Melanie Nash, the CEO of Genomics.
Genomics. So if for some reason you have any questions on being a tenant of the Innosphere building, you could definitely ask her. Who here is either a current client company of one of Innosphere's accelerator incubation programs, or a graduate? You're a graduate who's maybe gone through one of our accelerator programs. Graduates? Awesome. Would you mind saying your name and what company you're with?
Yeah, so my name is Natalie Malcutt, and I'm the founder of Blue Line Veterinary Technology.
Blue Line, awesome. And you're a current client company, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Any other graduates? You don't want to raise your hand because you know I'll make you see. But I do actually want to give a special thank you. We actually have people all the way from Cheyenne to Boulder here in the room with us. So if you're someone who made the trek from Wyoming, who would that be? You did? Awesome. Do you want to give your name and what company you're with?
I'm John McIntosh, Cabin Financial Advisors.
Cabin Financial Advisors, John McIntosh. And then right next to John is Jerry. Jerry is very special to Innosphere here in our startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, because he's one of our top advisors in what is called the Sage Advisor Program, advising startups. So Jerry, could you give a few words on the Sage program?
Sure. Sage program is really pro bono mentoring people who have a company or are about to have a company and getting it, sort of off the starting point.
Yep.
Currently working with a couple life sciences.
Okay. Yeah, Jerry's working with a couple life sciences companies. Do you have an idea of how many startups you've worked with over your time here?
I've only been part of the program for a little bit over 2 years.
Okay. Okay. Seems like so much longer. Yeah, so if you have a question on the Sage Advisor Program, which, like Jerry said, is a pro bono program for earlier stage companies to get off the finish line, particularly when you're struggling maybe with one specific question or hurdle, you can definitely talk to Jerry, and he'd be happy to tell you more about the Sage program. So one question that we definitely get from a lot of our client companies constantly is just, how can I best prepare myself to put my best foot forward to become a partner and investor ready? And so as a part of that mission to make sure that companies in this area are investor ready, that's why we put on these free entrepreneurial education sessions. So thank you for attending. And this one with Wilson and Sonsini is definitely going to give you insight on how you can become investor ready, but also from that legal standpoint as well. Here. And then, so first we have Matthew Meyer. He is the Chief Business Advisor for Life Sciences at Wilson Sonsini. Matthew works closely with startups and emerging companies on business strategy, growth, and fundraising. And joining him is Brent. Brent is a corporate partner based right here in Boulder, and he works with emerging growth companies and the investors that support them. He has deep expertise in venture financings, M&A, IPOs, and corporate and licensing transactions. So I mean, that's just a brief look into their expertise, but so you have, a life sciences expert who came all the way from San Francisco and someone local here in Boulder who they're definitely dedicated to trying to help your companies as much as they can. So definitely dig in, ask questions, and take notes to get the most out of today's session. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. Great to see you all. My name is Matt Meyer, and as mentioned, I run our life science business advisory practice at Wilson Sonsini. Together with Brent, we're really excited to be here today for the next hour or so. What we really hope to do is a couple things. We want to share our insights and suggestions on best practices in terms of how to put together a winning pitch to be successful fundraising with primarily venture investors. We'll talk a little bit about other sources of capital. And Brent will talk a little bit about what we call the 7 deadly sins when pitching. So it'll kind of build on some of the comments that I'm going to be making. And we want to make this interactive, as mentioned, so we're planning to kind of walk through our slides together for about 35 minutes. And then, this is really your time. And the most important thing that we can do today, in addition to leaving you with some of our thoughts and suggestions, is to have a chance to chat with you. And whether you're in the middle of fundraising, you're thinking about starting a company, or just curious, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, let's get rolling. I'm going to talk about how we raise money. See if this clicker is gonna work. Hopefully it does. So the most important thing I think to think about when you're raising money is, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're telling a story. And just like when you go to the movie or you read a great novel, you really have to be memorable. You want a story to be compelling, interesting, and you have to remember that investors see dozens and dozens of pitch decks, opportunities in a given month. So the way you can win as an entrepreneur raising money is, first and foremost, to make your story interesting. Let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. So what I like to do is think about, just like books are memorable, great stories, great companies are memorable, and you have to sort of think from the mindset of writing a great novel. What were some of the companies in the life science industry that are sort of amazing names that you may remember? And companies like Genentech, which had a founding story that opened the recombinant DNA era, which was ultimately, hugely successful, acquired by Roche for almost $50 billion. Exact Sciences did the same thing. They turned a colorectal screening test into a $10 billion market. They had a great story. They had a great vision. You can continue with Illumina, defined the genomics era, and Shockwave Medical, which helped to revolutionize niche calcium modification. The point of this is these companies all have really interesting stories. And when you guys think about putting together your pitch deck, you need to do the same thing. So as you're putting this together and you're structuring your deck, and we'll talk a little bit later about the elements of a winning pitch deck, think about it through the lens of that great novel that we started with. So you start with a theme. What is your founding insight or mission? Why are you doing this? Why are you so passionate about the company you're building that an investor should take notice and care? And then what's the plot? What's the plot of your business? Typically, the plot is the development, the iteration, the commercialization of your lead program. So, I have this lead asset that's going to revolutionize the treatment of cancer. Whatever it is, that's really kind of what the flow of your deck has got to be. Conflict and tension, just like a good novel, a good movie has conflict, tension, makes it interesting. Your company's going to have challenges. So what are the objections that you can anticipate an investor's going to have? How do you put those into your risk contingency plans? What is the competition? How can you overcome it? Make it really interesting, because it's going to be memorable for the investor that you're pitching to. And as importantly, it's going to demonstrate that you, the entrepreneur, is thinking through all these critical issues that are going to be fundamental to you being successful. The perspective, why does your offering have superior product and market fit and differentiation? The setting is the market you're going to create or the market you're going to enter. Characters are your products, your team, and the platform that you're on. So as you think about this, it sort of makes it interesting, actually, if you look at it through the lens of building, a great pitch through building a great story. But let's dig into a little bit more specifics now. You got sort of the sense of how do you have a great story. But a successful pitch really needs to have three critical components. The first is focused and compelling content. And we'll talk about elements of what that looks like in a minute. The second, which is really important, is understanding your investor. Not all investors are created equal. You may have an angel investor that might be looking at something with a different lens than a professional VC who is looking for bigger check size. So it's really important as you put together your pitch deck to then sort of hone your pitch and understand your audience. Because if you're kind of doing a one-size-fits-all approach, chances are it's not going to resonate because everyone's got a different lens that they're looking at. And then lastly, and this is kind of table stakes, confident and effective execution. It's so important that you just nail the pitch, right? It's hard to get an at-bat with an investor, so you don't want to squander that opportunity by not doing a great job, not knowing your material cold, not being prepared to answer questions, and also being willing to be honest and vulnerable, which means if you get a question that you don't, actually don't know the answer, it's okay. Investors are going to appreciate your honesty. Say, oh, that's a great question. I'm going to need to get back to you on that. So that's part of this confident and effective execution. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these in a moment in more detail. So in terms of the deck, we talked about how it's got to be a great story. It's got to flow like an amazing story in those different categories. But these 12 elements are really almost a checklist, which I would propose most, if not all, successful decks must have. And this isn't intended to be, strict and absolute, and of course there are going to be exceptions. And we don't have the time today to go through all of these. But the point is, I see so many decks in my job, Brent sees, with companies that come in, they fall in love with their technology, but they're losing sight of the big picture. The big picture is, you have to remember, investors are looking for excuses to disqualify you. Why? Not because they might not be interested in your technology, but because they see so many different opportunities. So you need to cut through the noise, and you need to just shine with your opportunity. And one way to do that, in addition to making your story memorable, and obviously you have to have a product that has a compelling market to address, but you really want the deck to hold together. So I would argue most, if not all of these are table stakes. And we're happy to make this deck available to you guys so you can sort of reference this for your own benefit going forward. The second thing, as I mentioned, was targeting the right investor. So, and know them. As mentioned, everyone's different. So are you talking to an institutional venture capitalist, a corporate VC, an angel, or a high net worth investor? Increasingly, we're seeing more interest in activity, especially in life sciences, with family offices, right? Basically, these very wealthy families that hire a money manager to put their money to work. And more of them are actually working with putting money to work in the context of venture funding, not just putting money into the capital markets. So really think about who you're pitching to, because how you're going to talk to them is going to matter. And if, again, as I said before, if you're not focusing on the right story to their investor, you're going to lose them. You also want to do homework on their investment strategy, background and interests. When you're getting in front of investors, it's such a great idea to look them up, obviously. Do 15 minutes of research. Go onto their LinkedIn profile. Let's Google them, or use AI now. It's even easier. Just to find out why, because it's sort of like an interview. I mean, all of you guys have interviewed for jobs, and wouldn't you argue that the best interviews are one where you connect with the person you're interviewing with? You kind of make that personal connection. It's not so much they're evaluating you as it's more a conversation. Well, the same dynamic, I would argue, exists and is an opportunity for you to succeed in the context of pitching. So the more you get to know about the investors, the better. Fund history, where are they in their life cycle? Are they almost out of capital? They need to raise a new fund. All these things are important to know. And then lastly, and certainly not least, is do you know anyone? Do you have friends who know folks at that investor in that fund? That's so helpful if you could make that common connection. So now it's time to prepare the pitch as if the round depends on it, because it does. And really, you know, as I was saying, this is kind of pulling it all together. You have your outline, you have your story, you learn who the investors are. Now you got to deliver it. So you want to make it personal as much as possible, as I said. You don't have to bespoke a deck for every investor. So I don't want you to come in thinking, my goodness, I'm going to meet with 15 investors. I got to make 15 decks. Not at all. But you just need to modify it based on some of those components that we talked about. Qualify your audience early. You want to focus the most interesting aspects of your pitch to them. So what does that mean? That could mean if you're in a meeting with some of these investors, chances are you probably sent them the deck as a pre-read. So you may just ask them, say, hey, I know your time is limited. Is there a certain aspect of our company, of our business, that you're interested in focusing on? It shows great, understanding and appreciation of their time, because they may say, hey, Matt, you know what? I read it. We're really concerned about is your IP position. So let's just go there. Beautiful. Let's just go and talk about what they're most interested in. Because if you drone on for a half an hour and you haven't covered what they really care about, lost opportunity. Engage and ask questions. As I was saying before, just like a good interview, it's a bit of a give and take. It's completely appropriate to ask the investor questions. Engage with them. Know your investor, as we mentioned, and tell the story. Really be passionate. You have to remember, these investors are seeing so many opportunities. You have to be memorable. You have to cut through the noise and really shine with what you're talking about. And then lastly, the pitch is a performance, so treat it like one. These are all best practices. I don't think we need to go through all of these. I'm sure all of you are familiar with what it takes to deliver a great pitch. I think the couple things maybe just to focus on here are be responsive. Take questions as they come. Do not defer them to Q&A. So this means you have to be completely comfortable with your presentation. You're not going to be thrown off course if someone comes to you on slide 3 and say, hey, Matt, I got a question about IP. It's really on my mind. Rather than say, hey, can you give me 15 minutes? We'll get there. Say, okay, let's go to that slide right now. It shows great engagement. Investors really appreciate that. And that's really part of this being flexible, adapt to your audience. Ultimately, this is an interview as much on the capabilities of your company as it is you as the leader of the company, because they're thinking two things. Is this a company I want to invest in? But as importantly, is this someone I'm going to want to work with, be in the trenches with for years and years potentially, in board calls, doing deals when the going gets tough? So your behavior, your ability to be composed and flexible really is important in that capacity. I'm going to turn now just a couple minutes on the state of the capital markets in private fundraising. You're all kind of aware that we're coming out of what we call sort of a biotech bear market, and I'm talking both public and private. But post-pandemic, the stock market for life science companies really was brutal, and the venture capital market really kind of took a turn negatively. So if you look at this chart on the left, you can see the amount of venture fundraising in life sciences over the past 6-7 years. And you can see, it dropped from $84 billion in 2021 down to $44 billion in 2023. It's coming back, and this year, this is first quarter data for 2026. It's $14 billion, which, assuming it's on that similar pace for the rest of the year, suggests we're stabilizing. So that's a good thing. And on the right here, this is just a bit of a snapshot showing you the amount of Series A and seed round funding, which is going to be most relevant here for you folks, in the U.S. and the EU by sector. This doesn't have therapeutics. It's more focused on med tech, diagnostics, and health tech. But I would say the therapeutics is where most of the money goes. But again, what you're seeing here is you're seeing improvement. The trend is going up. And last count, in 2026 so far, there have been 12 life science IPOs. So it's not great, but it's improving from where it was last year. I think the whole year it was probably 12 to 15. So we're definitely on the upswing. And this is just a bit of a busy chart here. It's kind of hard to read. But this in the med tech area, in the first quarter of this year, there were some notable transactions, some mega deals in the hundreds of millions of dollars. This is capital raised. But the point is things are improving. But in the early stage investment world, it's still tough. It's tough because there's been such a downturn. It's hard because there's still more of a risk-off mindset when it comes to venture investing. So what it means is you guys have to be even more disciplined when you're raising money to make sure that you're coming through with an absolutely compelling story and be very capital efficient. And what that means in terms of, thriving is some best practices here that I want to kind of emphasize. Clearly cash is king. So if you have a company already, you've raised some money and you want to make that cash last as long as possible because the ability to raise more money now is more uncertain than it was going back a few years. The good news is we do see an improvement in funding totals, and from a grant perspective, the NIH in April reauthorized the seed fund and the SBIR and STTR grant programs. As many of you know who are familiar with that world, huge uncertainty, with the new administration basically not authorizing those programs for some time. So it feels like we're coming back into a little bit of a normal state when it comes to that, but still you got to be very much focused on, as I said, extending the cash runway, prioritizing your programs. So let's say you have 2 development programs, focus on the one that you think is going to be successful because you may not have the cash to support 2, and investors are probably going to ask you to make that choice. For those of you that have employees, you have to think about retention. So equity grants, being more creative with how you keep people engaged is very important. For those of you who are looking at actually taking term sheets from VCs, there's a good chance if you've raised a first round, you might be looking at a flat or a down round, which means for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the valuation of your company may be the same as it was when you did your prior financing or even lower. Why do I mention this? Because we always say that companies don't die from dilution, they die from lack of cash. So as much as it may be painful to accept a lower valuation, if you have a term sheet and that's your best option, even if it's a lower valuation, you really have to take a close hard look and say, we might need to take this so we can live to fight another day. And then lastly, as I touched on, you have to consider alternative sources of capital now more than ever. So family offices, increasingly interesting, as mentioned. There are high net worth individuals who just, might be willing to put together angel seed funding of $50,000, $100,000, for example. Obviously, angels are increasingly active around the country. Great opportunity if you're an early stage company, maybe looking to raise a few $100,000. That's where angels tend to plug in. And then, of course, partnerships. You want to think about what else can I do to advance my company's interests without just raising money. So partnership's a great way to do it. See if you can link up with someone who can help advance your programs. If you have a payer relationship, maybe they'll do a pilot program to test drive your technology. All depends on where you are, and I know we have kind of a diverse group in here, so we won't get into that. And then last but not least are government grants. As I said, it seems like from a federal level, things are looking up. There's more federal opportunities now. And of course, state grants. I know Innisphere is a great resource for helping identify some of these grants that you can take advantage of. So the overriding goal is to extend your cash through key catalysts for the most promising programs and just keep running. And then this, I think, is the last slide I'm going to leave with, which is just, building on what we talked about, beyond the federal government, all kinds of interesting accelerators that you can tap into to access capital, services, even access customers. So obviously, some states will offer early stage startup funding. So you just have to do your homework and really think about this. Each company has its own technology, and there are going to be different programs that you'll be eligible for. Family offices we talked about, and partnerships, again, are a great way to think about this because investors ultimately will look to partnerships as a way to say, has your technology had some level of validation and acceptance? So even if you're not a commercial stage company, you can establish a partnership that would be very valuable to do. So with that, I am going to let Brent take you through the 7 deadly pitch sins, and then hopefully you have some questions, which we'll look forward to talking with you about in a minute. Brent?
See if I can go. Okay. So Matt was the, good news. These are kind of the record scratches that when you get to a pitch, and as Matt mentioned, it's, when you're pitching, right, it's comparative advantage. It's not just that I have a good company, but I'm the best company you're gonna see today or this month, right? And you can not only make money investing in me, but you're gonna make more money than you would if you invested in the other 3 pitch decks you saw. And it goes to the credibility. So the first thing is, you lead with the technology and not the problem, right? I think particularly as inventors, you create something cool, you look at it, it's a great result, and you get very excited about the mousetrap you've built. But if you think about it from somebody else who's talking to multiple founders, right, is what problem are you going to solve? Because the way you're going to make money for that investor is solving a marketplace problem. You don't get credit for, gee whiz, I have a new feature, right? And, whether it's a new target for a cancer therapeutic, or it's a new diagnostic, or anything, even a piece of software, right? The question is not, what's the cool thing you're seeing, what problem am I solving? And when we're talking about it, right, is how big is the unmet need, and which is tied to, why are current treatments inadequate? One of the things we see a lot, right, is somebody comes in and says, gosh, there's a, $10 billion market, and there's no competition in the space. All right, that strains credibility. In the modern world, right, there's no way that there's a $10 billion problem that you've happened upon that nobody else has happened upon it, right? So you have to be realistic about that and be honest, right? Because your answer is, I've got a solution that's going to put me in front of somebody else, but don't say, hey, nobody else has done it. And talk about and be realistic about what's the milestone you need to hit to demonstrate you've made a conscious incremental succession in your problem that you're solving, right? And there might be technological milestones you get to, but that's different than like, here's where I've done something that the market is going to come to me and give me credit for, right? All right, the next one. You have to be realistic about what your risks are, right? Because again, being an entrepreneur is hard. And the idea that you're going to come in and you've solved all the issues just isn't realistic, right? You have to come out and say, if you're going to say, hey, somehow I've jumped the development curve on a therapeutic, right? And I'm going to be in phase 3 in 3 years. That's not realistic if you're not in the clinic yet, right? You have to understand how long it's going to take to do phase 1, do phase 2, do phase 3. And you'll see some of them that say, oh gosh, somehow I've got my hands on an asset and I'm going to skip to phase 2 or I'm going to skip to phase 3. Are you really? And if you are, sort of, why is it that is sitting around and available? When you're going to have revenue, who's going to be adopting it, what your curve looks like. Everybody's got the hockey stick slide and it just kind of, keeps moving out. Be realistic about when you're going to get revenue. And again, what are people actually going to pay you for? And then be realistic about your founding team, right? If you're an inventor, are you really the CEO long term? Is that your skill set? Do you have somebody, or are you going to say, hey, I realize I'm a technical person, we're going to need a CEO at some point in there. Or I realize I'm a sales and marketing person, I need a technical person to come in. Or I need somebody that has commercial expertise that I don't have that's developed a product. Be aware the part-time founder, hey, I have a day job, maybe I'm an academic, and I'm not going to quit my professor job, I'm going to do this on the side, right? That is a big warning sign to investors. If you're not willing to commit 100% to whatever the enterprise is, they're not going to commit to you. And you just have, and again, it's fine if that's not the outcome, but you have to be realistic of, we're going to need to find somebody to run this enterprise, right? And I'm going to be supportive, I'm going to be open to it, I'd love to hear from your network, that kind of point. A good founder, right, is going to say, hey, there's risks, right? Nobody's going to come in and say, you know, you're going to give me $10 million and we're going to start cashing the checks. Once you have risks, then that gives you credibility, right? Something might go wrong. Hey, here's how I'm going to mitigate the risks, right? If this goes wrong, this is going to be my pivot. Or if it goes wrong, this is why we have an alternative solution. Understanding, you know, not just, hey, I've got a new cancer therapeutic, but, you know, what is my cancer therapeutic going to be? Can I pair it with Keytruda, right? Which is everybody's favorite flavor of the month, right? Understand the market dynamics, understand what reimbursement's going to look like. If I have a new diagnostic or an antibiotic, is there a generic that solves 90% of the problem out there that's available for $1 a dose? I'm not going to be able to come in and say, hey, I get $100 a dose, right? Unless I've got a very specific use case. And if that use case is there, what's the top end market for it? Use your investors to add talent. It doesn't have to just be employees, right? But I mean, it can be a great, hey, I know somebody that knows how to build a sales organization, or I know somebody that knows how to do clinical trial designs. Reach out to them, and they should be adding the value. And this tends to be the difference between a lot of what we would call institutional VCs and like a family office or an angel network. I mean, sometimes the angels are good sources because they know it, but they have to be specific to your particular area. Realize investors know the risks, and if you come in and say there are no risks, or I've addressed all these risks, or somehow I've magically, you know, waved the wand and eliminated it, you're just not going to be credible as a founder. The commercial story, and this is true regardless of your stage of development, whether you're a therapeutic or going to a market, right? Understanding that you need to actually have a product that's sellable. Even if you're a therapeutic and you're 12 years away, you should be able to describe what your label is going to say, right? This is what I'm going to run all my clinical trials, and this is going to be a label that's going to be a product that people will buy. Because that's what's going to be, even if it's a 12-year, you know, until you get there, it's going to build your credibility, but it's also going to show you understand all the incremental steps it's going to take to commercialize it. Who's paying for it, right? And, you know, it's one thing of like, hey, I think I'm going to save this pharmacoeconomic theory, right? Everybody's like, oh, I'm going to reduce hospitalizations by X. Is the person who benefits from reduced hospitalization the same person that's going to be paying for it, right? Is an insurance company going to benefit different than a pharma company that maybe that you want to buy, right? So understand, just because you have a pharmacoeconomic argument, is that the person that's going to be your investor or ultimate buyer? Will physicians adopt it? It's funny, the most guilty of this are the physicians themselves, right? You'll get a surgeon that says, oh, I have a problem in my practice. I invented a solution for my practice. Now I'm going to try to commercialize it for the whole world, right? That isn't always the case. And it may be, you see a lot of times you have a very talented surgeon, right? And he's come up with a new process, but he can't productize his skill set, right? And it's not a product that you can sell to other people other than just like, hey, I'm a great surgeon and I can put this in, isn't always that attractive. You have to understand differentiation, right? You've got a solution. Why is your solution better than the other ones? We do work with Ambrosia Biosciences. They just raised a $100 million Series B. They're in the GLP market. The GLP market is the most, it's popular, right? It's the AI of biotech, but it's the most crowded market out there, right? There's a new one coming out. There's an oral one. You can take it once a month. You can take it once a week. You're going to have 3 different methods of action. So you need to understand, why is it that your particular version of that solution is attractive, and why is it going to beat the other ones, right? How am I going to displace what's already in place? And the last one, making the company venture scale. A lot of people miss this, right, of, oh, I only need $3 million. For a lot of people, you've taken yourself out of the running for the capital pool, right? If there's only $3 million being put to work, it's not enough to be attractive to that investor. You have to have them put enough money to work in your deal. And, you know, when we talk about the other part of venture scale is a venture-like return, right? Every deal a VC puts their money into has to have the potential of 8 to 10x. You know, particularly if it's an early stage, right? If you just say, hey, I can do a 2x, in most cases, that's not enough for a venture-like return. Because you have to understand, they're gonna do 10 deals, and they know of their 10 deals, half of them are gonna fail, right? So they have to make their money on the ones that are successful. And that means they have to pay for the failed deals too. So you have to understand that it's not just making some money, it's making venture-like money. You might end up in the failed category, not a great outcome, but it happens. But if you end up in the successful category, a somewhat successful at the outset isn't enough to compel the investment, right? It has to be something that has a successful scale. You have to define your scientific moat, your IP position, and all your regulatory advantages. There has to be something in there, right, that keeps other people from coming into your market. And particularly if there's an 800-pound gorilla in your market, what's to keep them from just looking at your idea and copying it? That's a huge factor. And, you know, I have a patent is not the same as my patent covers this, which is the essential value of what I'm creating. Right? Having a patent doesn't mean you can keep somebody out of your market. I was teaching lecturing to one of the CU students, and one of them just said, look, if I see a patent on software, I can just go to my Claude and say, do this on a different code, right? And your AI agent is just going to give you a workaround. Your IP has to be strong enough to get you around. If there's a regulatory advantage, you have to do that. I've got a code that nobody else can cross-sell to, right? I've got a new diagnostic or something like that. I've got a code that is not a low-value code, it's a high-value code, and nobody else can get it by doing a 510K. The last one on this one is, can a VC explain your advantage in one sentence after the meeting? That's a huge part, and you know, as Matt was talking about, we want to be able to articulate when they see your pitch and they go talk to, you know, somebody at a cocktail party, or they need to take it to their partners, what's their one sentence line of, I'm excited about this company because they fill in the blank, right? And if they don't come out of your pitch with that ability, you're probably not getting a call back to the next level. Understanding what you're going to get for the money, right? When you say, hey, we're raising 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, it's not just, that's what I'm raising, right? You have to say, this many amount of money gets you this milestone, right? We're going to put it in humans. I'm going to get my first 10 customers. I'm going to get to break even, right? You have to say, this amount of money you give me is going to justify a step up in the next level. So you have to be aware of that. And, you know, it's the Gantt chart, right? Most board slides have some version of, you know, time, dollars in, and milestone. And so you have to say, if you give me this money, these are the milestones I'm going to give you that are going to build value. And you have to be, you know, it's tough. One of the things we see with a lot of, particularly biotech companies are, well, gosh, I've got to spend so much money on manufacturing. You get almost no credit for being able to manufacture, even though it's expensive, right? So you have to understand, even if I take a lot of my raise, and that's building, you know, manufacturing my molecule for human clinical trials, that doesn't build value, right? Getting the drug in a patient and getting a result builds value. And so you have to be realistic about what I'm getting money for, is that building a venture-like value increase. Another one we see a lot, right? People get to kind of the end of their pitch and then, oh, well, we're going to get to phase one and we're going to partner. That is not an outcome, right? It's a potential, but there's no way to guarantee that, and it's certainly not a business model, right? And so you have to understand that when you're building a company, not an exit. Even if the investor wants the exit, they're not going to believe you, right? You'll see a lot of people, well, gosh, if I get to phase one and I put it in humans and don't kill somebody, I'm going to get bought, right? Unlikely. And investors know that. They've been around it. They've seen, they get to the phase one and now I need a lot more money for phase two and phase three, and nobody's bought the company. So market dynamics and the buyers are likely to motivate a transaction. It's true if I know Amgen needs a new, cancer adjuvant that's going on the market in 2035, you might be the right answer to it. But you can't tell 5 years before that who's there. Don't plan, if you plan a collaboration or a partnership, it's likely to fail you, right? You have to understand what the real dollars in are going to be and realize that if you take a partnership, it's not free money. You're giving away something for that partnership, and that's going to diminish your ultimate value. So just because a partnership is not a panacea, it might be an endorsement, but you're giving something for it. It's not free. Be realistic about your comps. If you come in and say, hey, I'm a early stage company, and by the way, my 3 comps are $3 billion exits, how much did those companies raise to get to a $3 billion exit? I mean, other than a few of the AI startups, right now, right, supposedly have 3 employees. But if you look at, companies that are exiting for $1 billion plus, the amount of dollars raised, 50, 60, 100 million, there's very few, right, that don't have that amount in. And so you need to be realistic about, if I'm going to claim this is a comp for my company, how much did it take to get there? And it's not probably their Series A or their seed financing. And then Matt talked about this a little bit. Be realistic about your valuation. One of the biggest things we see, especially with angel investors or friends and family, is people pat themselves on the back when they get a really high Series C value. And then they sort of say, hey, I got 10 million pre, then I got a 20 million pre, I didn't sell as much stock, but now I need institutional money. And they go to the institutional investors and they say, well, gosh, my post on my last round was 25 million. And your institutional investor says, well, at the stage you're at, my pre's are 5 million, right? And it's one of those record scratch moments. Nobody wants to go to Uncle Bill and say, by the way, Uncle Bill, we just took a 70% haircut on your investment. What's for dinner at Thanksgiving this year, right? So you have to be aware of it. And sometimes a VC will just look at it and say, hey, you're too expensive. I'm not going to go any farther, right? Even if you're willing to take the haircut, they'll just say, I don't want that problem. I don't want to buy into, upset first series of investors. Who the money is coming from is more important than the initial valuation, right? If you get an investor that comes in and whether they have contacts, experience, a network, or they can put you in touch with somebody, that can be a lot more value add than just who's writing the check, right? And there's discussions of dumb money, right? I think the Theranos story is one of the most classic examples, right? Theranos got a ton of money, but none of the investors were VC investors. And they were people that when Liz Holmes said, hey, you can't do due diligence, all the life science investors turned them away, right? And so the money that came in was not smart money and didn't help rein in that company, and we know where it ended up. This is one of my favorite George Rathman quotes that Kyle Lefkoff likes to talk about. When they're serving peas, eat peas, right? If you've got money, be very careful. Oh, I'm going to turn it away, right? I could have taken 10 million, but I'm only going to take 5 million because I don't want the dilution. It could be, if it was 2021, there are a lot of people that wish they had that extra 5 million now. So be aware, take the money if the money is there. And like Matt said, nobody ever went out of business for dilution. A lot of companies have gone out of business because they didn't have enough money. And be realistic about the control issue, right? You're going to lose control of your company if you take outside money. That's the truth of the matter. The Mark Zuckerbergs of the world are called unicorns for a reason. There aren't very many of them around, right? And even if you don't sell 50% on the first round, there will be enough control hooks put into that investment. They can fire you as your founder, right? The way you're going to maintain your job security is continue to add value. And you just have to realize that once you take outside money, you're along for the ride, right? And you have to be aware of that and be comfortable with that as an outcome. And have confidence in yourself that you can continue to add that value. Or you can go do something else, right? And you put it in good hands. That's all. Questions? There's all the good news at the end.
Right, yeah, exciting.
I have a question for Matt, and thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if there's a difference in terms of the pitch, the presentation to a corporation that you're looking to partner with versus a venture capital company that you're raising money from. Are there things that you focus on differently?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So just to make sure everybody heard it, is there a difference between the pitch you make to a financial investor versus a corporate strategic partner?
Correct.
The answer is yes, for sure. So I think the big difference is with the strategic partner, you really want to gear the story towards how do we help you, right? What are your issues? Where do we plug in? And really be very focused on that, because I've seen plenty of investor pitch decks that are used with strategics and they just fall flat for an obvious reason, right? Because you've got to put yourself in the headspace of the corporate partner. And, I'm not doing this just because I want to make money. That may be a subsidiary benefit, but I'm interested in you because presumably you have a product, you have a service, something. So I think, I would say probably 2/3, roughly 75% of the deck could probably be the same. You just want to focus in on a couple of the key slides of where does 1 + 1 = 3 type of thing, where you highlight where your product or service plugs in and helps them.
Thank you.
Sure. What other questions? Yes.
With the market and the funding kind of being more focused on late-stage assets, things that are 14 to 16 in the clinic, as opposed to more like your outlandish CRISPR-type, cure-all therapies, along with the market also being more interested in coming in from China, given the strength of their biotech, biopharma build-out now. What's your recommendations for companies that are U.S.-based, obviously, that are just pure initial proof of concept stage, and how they think about the long-term strategy to be able to raise funding in a market that is really focused on later stage assets?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have a lot of clients that are in that
a
challenging situation, right? So your preclinical asset, it's very hard to get venture funding, as you mentioned. China definitely is becoming more of a source of innovative assets and often not as expensive. So I think you kind of have to go back to the slide I was showing around looking for alternative sources of funding. So grants, I think, really would lean in there. Can you get creative with, let's say, university collaborations for animal studies? So I think grants. Also, this is where I think the high net worth and the angel and the family office avenue becomes more important. And specifically, what do I mean there? A lot of these family offices, they're very mission driven. So for example, take an example, in San Francisco, we have the Dolby Foundation. It's a family office that's focusing on investing in neuroscience related drugs. So if you got a preclinical asset, let's say in neuroscience, Dolby will be all over it because they actually, because it's a mission orientation, they're willing to take that risk. Their expectations are a little different than a classic venture fund. So I think it's those types of things. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, we see Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has been active. There's glaucoma foundations. As Matt mentioned, you know, we've seen founders that, hey, I have diabetes in the family. So things like that, but that, you know, becomes a very targeted pitch, right, of you're passionate. And somewhat, I mean, I think you have to be realistic of, if I'm looking at opportunities of what I want to develop, is this an idea that is going to be able to find traction in the market, right? And that's where you can fall in love with, this is a cool technology, somebody ought to love it. Is it really, you know, is today the day, right, for that asset? It can be challenging, right, to say, this is something, you know, that I'm going to need 100 million, can I really get 100 million?
Yeah, we have one example, so just to build on that, we have a company that's developing a PTSD-based therapeutic. Huge unmet need, especially for vets coming back from, you know, conflict. They suffer, you know, and there isn't really a good therapeutic out there. It's behavioral therapy. And this company has raised some money from the DOD, okay? Because the DOD has a vested interest. So it's exactly what you were saying, Brent. It's, can you try to find a source of creative funding that has a orientation to wanting to advance, you know, that drug or that approach that you're developing,
And have a use for the money that will make a difference, right? If I get that money, here's an important question that I'm going to answer. You know, I can change the course of the PTSD. You know, some of the clinical tools, right? Like, I'm going to, you know, you can diagnose the cancer 2 years earlier. And you see some of it, you know, to me, what is a lot of these interesting companies, right? It's not necessarily that their diagnostic will be used to diagnose cancer, new cancers, but if you go to a pharma that's developing a therapeutic in your area, they can use your diagnostic in their clinical trial. And that's, you know, it's a different sales pitch, it's a different market, but it's valuable. And if you can do something where you say, hey, you know, 3 pharma companies have used my diagnostics, that's valuable.
So you touched on the Dolby Foundation, you mentioned neuroscience, neurodrugs. They're also interested in devices. We are just going into the place to funded by foundation, Alzheimer's prevention, so it's amnestic, non-cognitive impairment treatment, and we're looking to extend money that we're getting from the foundation. So our next, is the Dolby on the right?
it could be. It could be. I think they tend to focus on therapeutics, but I think if you have great technology, worth taking a look. So happy to information if you have. I can share it with them. No problem. Anything else? Yeah.
I'll take a quick one. I'll save you the long anecdote, but I've been working with a company for 8 months. They were quite advanced. I saw some of their 7 deadly sins in Brent's presentation. But I left a long fundraising effort with, as a consultant, as a sensation that, with the feeling that the market is very, very risk averse, more so than ever. And I guess I just would like to hear your perspectives on it. Is that what you feel? Is it a different market than it was through 2010 to 20? I raised 40-something million in VC for biotech and startups. The last couple of years, I feel like it's been a lot more risk averse, a lot more difficult. They've had higher expectations. They want you to be much further along the development timeline than now. I'd like to just hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I can start, Brent. See a lot of deals too. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a tale of two market segments, meaning if you're not a successful entrepreneur who has had an exit where the VCs will be willing to bet on you, it's very hard if you have an early stage asset to get funded. But in contrast, you see, and one of the slides mentioned it, there are a lot of more mega rounds going on where VCs are launching these stealth companies with $50–100 million in the Series A. And typically those are companies where the CEO or the founding team has been successful previously. And, you know, there's a de-risking in theory in the eyes of the investors. But if you're not in that fortunate category, it's harder than ever. And it's harder than ever because I think the hangover effect from the pandemic downturn, post-pandemic downturn, is real. And I think VCs have been burned. And a lot of VCs they're not able to raise new funds. Why? Because they invested in a time where they put a lot of money in, let's say, in the run-up and during the pandemic, when valuations were very high. Well, what's happened since then? As we mentioned, liquidity has dried up. You know, very few IPOs have happened. Yes, there is M&A coming back, and I think we are coming back into an upswing. But meanwhile, these VCs are struggling. And if they're struggling, they're not going to invest, and they're not going to take as much risk. And plus, they have to allocate more funds for existing portfolio companies because they now have to weather the storm and keep those folks liquid and funded until they can get an exit. Brent, you want?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of those, I think you had the slide in there of how much the VC funds are raising less now, right? And that's a huge, you know, it's not that there are less VC funds going into portfolio companies. If I'm a GP of a life sciences fund, can I raise my next fund? And you're seeing a lot of pressure, and that number is going down, right? And I think one of our questioners mentioned it. If I'm, you know, 3/4 of the way through my fund, I need to raise another fund. My last 2 or 3 deals in my fund that I'm going to do now need to be potential for a quick exit, right? Because I'm not going to raise my next fund if I don't get liquidity in my current fund. And, you know, when you talk about knowing your audience, you have to know that, you know, I think there is this perception of like investors are these, you know, gilded people with big bags of money. Most of them are, you know, first fund, second fund, maybe third fund. They're not going to have a job if they don't get to the next fund, right? And so you have to understand that when you're pitching to them, they're looking for you to, you know, can you solve I need an 18-month exit outcome, right? And if that's the investor you're talking to, is your opportunity fit with them, right? And if it doesn't, you know, your Venn diagram just got smaller. And so I think you have to know your audience when you're pitching the opportunity, right? Is this somebody that really has a horizon of years versus months?
Thank you.
Yeah, time for a couple more.
Probably this year I pitched to 5 VCs. 3 of those 5, they said there's no money left in the fund. Having pitched to them, that's the response. It's like come back in the fall, right?
Yeah, right.
So 3 out of 5. I mean, that was like kind of shocking.
Yeah.
These are big name VCs.
There's a lot of those, you know, I've got companies that are, you know, oh, as soon as we close our fund, we'd love to invest in you, right? But they're, you know, that runway gets longer.
The other one I hear is, oh, it's a medical device, it's going to take forever. You already told us it's de novo, so it's not a PMA, it's not a 510K. So that's going to be 3, 5, maybe longer. They're looking for quick return on their money.
Right, yeah. Challenge.
Then go back to your point, somebody said, our competition is a company called Cognito Therapeutics. This was set up the last 5 years with 5 PhDs from MIT. They've raised $233 million. They do cortical networks. We do autonomic networks. So when you mention that, it's like, oh, okay. And then they stop. It's interesting. Is
there another?
Yeah, I'll see if I can phrase it correctly. I was listening to it, effectively my own. In view of all the funding issues, and if you're not connected to a founder who's said it 3 times before, you don't have that sort of income. What do you think, how do you position yourself, or how does the market look at technology spaces that they're willing to bet on now? And my mind is going to, you know, position yourself as a me too, a first in class, a best in class, a platform? Like if you have an open space where you're not locked into, I have this one molecule for this one disease, and I want to be open-minded. What do you think is currently exciting to investors?
AI, GLP. It's hard, you know, I don't think
they're going to be done to death at this
right,
point.
I think, you know, it's hard to say that, right, because, you know, we've done presentations, and we've got, one of our IP partners has one next week for CBSA, platform versus product.
Right.
It's almost your audience, right, because you're gonna go into one pitch and be like, oh, I got a platform. Well, you're not focused, right? And then you go into, you know, well, I've got a product. Well, now, you know, I've got so much risk, right, that you're putting in. It's a challenge, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and it will change. You know, a lot of it comes to the resonate, you know, look at who you're pitching to. Do they tend to, you know, develop platform stories, or do they tend to develop product stories? And knowing who that audience is. And, you know, in 2021, if you had a, you know, PowerPoint with a platform, you could get $100 million, right? In 2024, you better have, you know, I need the next 5 million to get my next clinical trial done, right?
That's right. I think, you know, inflammation and immunology are also hot now too. INIs, they call it. But, you know, I think you just, I mean, obviously you need to be true to what your technology is, and if you pass this muster with some of the screens out here, you know, it may just mean that you have to weather this nuclear winter of funding, which isn't pleasant, but it might just mean if you really believe what you're doing, just hunker down, get some grant funding. You know, the good news is everything changes, right? As we talked about, there's such a cyclicality to this, and that may be cold comfort to many of you who are struggling to raise. However, if you really believe what you're doing and you can at least find a way to move forward, advance the ball, that's going to be most important. Because if you start to pivot too much, you know, that has its own complications in my experience.
When is the nuclear winter going to end?
We've been waiting for a while.
We're in the AI bubble verse plus 6 months.
Could be soon. Okay, one last question.
Okay, thank you. And I can't remember if your slide had this detail, but it talked about the different categories of where to go for startup companies, raise money, including grants, state, federal grants. The pools of money that are currently available, trend-wise, that you mentioned that the VCs are raising less money, less new funds, the foundation, state, federal grants, institutional VCs, get a few others, family offices.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, at least if you don't have the actual numbers right now, the trends?
I think, yeah, it's a good question. Directionally, I think family offices, definitely, you're seeing a lot more interest in life science investing, so that would be a bucket I would look at. I think the federal funding, it seems, again, you know, things in federal government are very dynamic these days. At least today, as we sit here, it seems like there is, funding has been renewed, so that I would think is at least steady state. I'm not sure it's going to be increase to where it was. But I think definitely VCs it's a tougher area to tap into. Again, you have to be very intentional. For some VCs that are very prolific, like RA Capital, I would take a look at them. They've raised, I don't know, half a dozen funds. They do 3 deals a year. So that would be a good one. They have a deal machine. They're cranking through diligence. Chances are you're going to get an at-bat with them if your technology fits their criteria. So I think with VCs, you have to be more selective.
The DoD money, there's a lot in defense tech, dual use. You know, there's a lot of startups in that area, right? And there's a lot of money still flowing. Those grants never got interrupted. So there's a ton of money there. I think it's going to take a while for the NIH stuff to, and, you know, what's the size going to be and what's the criteria. But the DoD stuff, we've seen a lot. And then there's also, you know, if you look at the onshoring, right, we've got companies, you know, in the mining space, clean tech space. It's interesting, some of those clean tech companies have pivoted from a carbon story to resource scarcity, right? There's not enough iron ore, there's not enough copper ore. And there are some technology solutions out of places like mines and, you know, that area where there's a demand for those products in that area. It's a pivot from where they were, but it's the same fundamental.
Thanks for all the questions. It's a pleasure, and thanks for our hosts at Innosphere for giving us the opportunity. As I said, we're happy to have the slides circulated, and if anybody has questions, you know, please reach out. We'd be delighted to be helpful.